Today's tutorial will cover how to 3D model and render roses using Cinema 4D and Redshift to celebrate Valentine's Day, which is coming up really soon. You can give your render to someone that you care about. I hope you enjoy this tutorial, and if you do, please hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much. The first thing we're going to do is grab a plane. I'm going to make it in the +Z direction and take down the segments to 1 and 1. This is going to be our petal, so I'm going to make it 1 inch by 1 inch since that's closer to the size of a petal. And I'm going to go ahead and make this editable, and you can also press C to make it editable, or press that button there. I'm going to press L, hit the edges button. I just want a few poly loops near the top so that we can make this rose curve, because when I looked at photos of roses, if we look really close, you can see here that the petals have a little bit of curl to the top of them. I'm going to click UL to select all of these loops up here, E to move them, deselect this loop, and just move them into the position I'd like them to be in. ML, I'm going to add a poly loop here and here. I'm going to select these loops, press T, scale them in, and bump them out so we have a little bit more of a curve to them. I'm going to select these 2 points here. And maybe I'll scale them in a little bit. I'll scale in those points a little bit. G for iron. As I'm quite evening things out the way I had pictured in my mind, so I might manually click on some of these points to move them a little bit more. T for transform, move these in a little bit and move them up. I want this flower to be pretty low poly because there's going to be quite a few petals on here. I want this petal to be pretty low poly so that it doesn't make our scene too heavy. Of course, you can adjust this, how many polygons are in here for your purpose. If you're going to have thousands of flowers, you may want this to even be lower poly than this, but if you're just making a few, this is pretty good. From there, I'm going to grab a circle. I'm going to name this rose petal. In the circle, I'm going to put it in the XZ plane. I'm going to make this 1 inch in diameter. I may even scale that down more in a little bit. I'll call this petal clone path because we're going to grab a cloner and clone it along the path. I'm going to drop the rose petal into the petal cloner. I'm going to adjust this to say object because we're going to clone the petal along our path. And now you'll see all of our petals are going the wrong way. The best way to fix that is to go under the transform, and you'll notice that if you start changing the degrees, move this into the position you'd like. I think the circle is a little bit too big. And I think we have too many petals on this circle. So you can reduce the count down here by clicking on the petal cloner. Sometimes the top view helps. You see a little bit better the angle of your rose petals. I'm going to adjust these a little bit more. They look like they're slightly backwards. I like it when the rose petals overlap a little bit because they also do that in real life. So a little bit of overlap. I'm going to adjust the diameter or scale of the circle again. Adjust the transform, have a little bit more overlap. This is looking like a good start. I'm going to drop these down into a null, which I'm going to name Rose Petal Layer. I just find that easier for organization purposes because we're going to duplicate this and it will get a little bit messy unless if we do that. I'm going to shrink down the circle. And now you'll see we're starting to have a second layer for our beautiful rose. And as I work on this and I'm able to see how it's turning out, I can slowly adjust these over time. So I want this layer on the exterior to be tilted outwards a little bit more. And I have to keep an eye out for intersections like that are showing. I really don't like that. So we're going to need to fix that. So this is our exterior layer and this is our interior layer. I'm going to grab this, turn off the petal cloner for a minute so that I can adjust this. And then I pressed ML so that I can add a poly loop here. I might not do this for every single layer because I want this to be low poly, but in this instance, this will prevent that overlap from happening. I'm going to turn back on the petal cloner. It's still overlapping a little bit, so I'm going to take these points and scale them in. That's helping, but not enough. And we have that resolved right there. We don't need as many petals in here, so I'm going to take down the number. I'll go through adjusting all of these, and some of these petals I'll even scale down to get them to be the appropriate size. But you have the idea of what affects what. You can even grab the whole node and rotate it so that you have a little bit of variation. I'm going to create several layers. and speed it up a little bit. Here I'll click transform. The closer the petals get to the center of the flower, they start to tilt inwards. So I'm going to transform these flowers so that they tilt inwards. I'm also going to make them a little bit skinnier, these petals in the center. So these exterior petals are very, very close, but what you'll probably notice is that this doesn't look pretty on the bottom. So what we'll do is we'll fix that by going into our rose petal layer. And we'll turn off the clone for right now. And hide everything except for that rose petal by clicking this icon up here, Viewport Solo, ML, Polyloop Selection. I'm going to add a polyloop selection there. Select the points. These two. Transform them in extremely close together. Turn back on the cloner. Turn off the hide. And I'm going to move these towards the center and down. That's a little bit better of an overlap. There's still a little bit of intersection happening, so I'm going to drop this down a little bit. I'm going to use the cone. Turn it upside down. Just make it smaller so I can see what's happening here. I'm reducing the bottom radius. I'm going to make this cone editable. I'm going to name it stem. Select those there. Pull them down. Scale these in. I'll select all these points and transform them to 0, and that will actually make them all on the same level. Press R for rotate, because usually stems are cut on an angle. At this point, I'd like to create a rose leaf. And instead of 3D modeling a plain and exact shape of a leaf, I'm going to use a sprite node in Redshift, which means I need to find an image with a rose leaf on it. This might take me a minute to find the perfect rose leaf online, so I'll get back to you once I find it. So here we are in Photoshop now, and I'm going to drop in my rose leaves. So this is one option. I'd like to make sure that I'm deleting all the white. So that this is transparent. Selecting in here, hitting delete. I'm going to copy and paste the rose leaves, holding down Control-Shift-V so that I paste it in the same place. You can see if I move this, there are two there. I'm going to hit this little button here and this button here and hide this layer. I'm going to press B for brush, make sure that it's on white, 100% opacity, and these are white. I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to name it black. Rename this one white. So the reason why I'm doing this is I'd like to also make an alpha map. So I'm actually making maps for the color and the alpha. I'm going to export both of these. Here I'd like a plane. We don't need many segments. I'll take it down to being a smaller size. And then I'll create a new material under Redshift. I'm going to create a sprite material. Drag our alpha into the path, and you'll see that the background just disappeared where our leaves were. And then I'll take the colored image and drag that texture in here and have that be the shader input. I'll drag this onto here. And you won't be able to see the transparency in our viewport because we're doing this in Redshift. But if you go to Redshift render view and add, let's say, a light, let's add a dome light, you'll be able to see that that is in fact transparent. And if you like there to be a little bit of bend to these leaves, you can go back in here and add some poly loops to it. I want this to be pretty subtle though. I think for something like this, once you make it editable, it's very important to bring your axis by pressing that button to the base of your stem because it makes it very easy to position. I have to turn this off again in order to move the plane again. But what I can do is I can actually rotate this a little bit. And we're adding more complexity without much extra work needed. I'm going to make this second set of leaves in the hierarchy of this leaf stem, so that if I decide to rotate this first one, everything moves with it. I'm going to create a new Redshift material. And color pick the color from here. Bump up the roughness. Drag this onto the stem. This looks a little bit too dark. I'm going to try to color pick. Oops. I'm going to try to color pick this lighter green right here. And that looks more correct to me. And now if you'd like to change the color of the individual petals, that will be the next material we make. Create materials, Redshift materials, material. I'll take a moment to name all of these. And holding down Alt, I drag it where this box lights up and let go, and that will override the other material. So that's what happens if you have multiple materials that show up here because you're copying and pasting and it's becoming a mess. That's how you clean it up. For the rose material, look for C4D shader, drag that in here, and then add a texture node here. The C4D shader will go into the texture node. The texture node will go into the diffuse color. I'd like this to be rougher. We're going to use the gradient for the shader. Click the arrow here to bring up our options. And here you can change the color. This one is for saturation with an S. This one is for value, how light or dark it is, so that can be adjusted here. I'm going to copy that and delete this one here. And just take down the value a little bit to something slightly darker. And now I can drag this to each one of our layers here. We can adjust the direction of the gradient. And even add a subtle amount of turbulence. This looks far too reflective to me. Or at least it shouldn't be reflecting that light of a white color. I'm going to have it be a more pink. I think that's more realistic. So now we have this nice subtle texture on there. At this point, I'm going to speed up this video quite a bit because I'm going to take this rose to make a bouquet and to make roses of all different colors for the bouquet. So to make this video a little bit shorter, I sped it up. But if you have any questions about what I'm doing at this point, please feel welcome to reach out and ask. It's mostly duplicating and making sure that the roses aren't overlapping and that there's no leaves that are overlapping. Once I made a bunch of the roses, a smaller bouquet, I actually copied and pasted that to make even more, which you'll see in a second right here. And then once I was happy with that, I used the lathe tool in order to create a pot for it. I adjusted the lighting. I didn't like the original dome light that I put in there. That was mostly just to see the transparency of the leaves and to see what I was doing as I was working, but it's not the most beautiful for a render. I used the inflate brush tool in order to make it look like there's fabric on a table that this vase is sitting on top of, and that just adds a little bit of extra realism to it. So now we have a pretty nice bouquet for your loved one. If you'd like, you could add some text. You can type whatever you want in here. You could type Happy Valentine's Day. You could use this render for a card or whatever you want. There's one more thing that I'd like to point out is that sometimes you'll notice your alphas have these white lines around them. And one way to fix that is in Photoshop. So I have this right here. I'm going to color pick this green, press G, and fill it in. And if I click a couple times, there really shouldn't be any more white lines. And I'll restart this render. And now you'll see that we don't have those white lines around all of your leaves, so that's how you fix that. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, please let me know, and I hope you enjoyed it. And remember to hit like and subscribe if you did.